Hola.
The most telling aspect of today's debate is the focus on specifics rather than on principle, on trends in data and details of subsidy rather than of the eager pursuit of freedom, of continuing comfort with the state making choices for us rather than a clamour by us for the freedom to be responsible for ourselves. As Oxford University ranks the stringency of the UK's response the fourth most restrictive in the world after Cuba, Eritrea and Ireland, this absence is telling. 1 year ago, few of us would have suggested that the state could ban you from leaving your home, from leaving the country, from getting married, from touching a loved one in their final moments, to stop a child receiving education, or to keep an elderly person living alone from the comfort of a neighbourly chat over a cup of tea. Do we fully appreciate the scale of what we have done? This has been a year of ambiguous choices when each of us in Parliament has had to wrestle with our conscience to render judgments with many unknowns. Yet each of us, rightly or wrongly, has allowed essential freedoms to lapse and thus been party to the creation of a new illiberal precedent that may imperil the meaning of liberty for decades to come. We should each reflect on our judgments to determine how we can repair our common heritage of freedom. For the House to reflect whether it has provided effective legislative scrutiny, whether casting members away gave too much allowance for executive decree, whether the experiment of remote technology has substituted a pretense for the substance of scrutiny, parading a Potemkin Parliament as the real thing. For government ministers to reflect whether speed of response became an excuse rather than a genuine requirement for presumptive executive action, whether the drift toward law-making without the sharing of adequate data, questioning or accountability with Parliament, became a lazy path routinely chosen for convenience rather than need. For the opposition to consider why their response to the greatest power grab by the state has been to demand more state, more restriction and more control, a series of cynical, tactical moves designed to wrong-foot government in mid-crisis, at best setting out a vision of even greater repression and control whilst heightening public fears and worry. For myself and my colleagues on these backbenches, to reflect whether a more vigorous defence of our liberties was called for, and if so, why we did not heed that call. For our citizens, we should ask to what purpose we removed those liberties a year ago, and again today for the withholding of these liberties yet further. For the decision has not been so much one of medical necessity, but rather of a presumed political necessity. So we should reflect candidly and fearlessly whether the accumulated costs in diminished livelihoods, in debts, in school closures, in misdiagnoses, in loneliness and in lives lost as a result of these measures has been worth the reduction in COVID deaths and the avoidance of an annual rate of death for our population that was commonplace and went unremarked barely 2 decades ago. Whatever the conclusions of our reflections, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must now resolve together to lead the recovery of these liberties with every moment and every strength we have.